Hello and welcome to another Melta podcast. With us today is Rachael Harris. Rachael has taught English as a foreign language, literature, and media studies for over 20 years. And as always with my guests, I always try to give them the chance or the opportunity to introduce themselves by themselves. Hi, Harris.
Hi.
Okay.
As you said, I've taught for many years. I taught adults, I've taught business, I've taught primary. It's the wonderful thing about our job. It's one career, but it's so wide as well. At the moment, I'm teaching primary students, but my main job at the moment is probably special education needs coordinator. And I do that much more than actually teaching, in fact.
I
So
see.
that's what I would add.
In your book, which I won, yeah. For those who don't know, I read you are a qualified SIN coordinator
Mhm.
and IATEFL inclusive practice and SIN SIG and is passionate about to discover it. For those who don't know, what are they?
So, first of all, a SEN coordinator, special education needs coordinator. My job at my school is when the teachers feel that a student has perhaps a specific barrier to stop them learning, they ask me to come in and observe and work with the student. And I may do assessments, I may send them off for external assessments, or we may already be aware that our students have different neurodiverse needs, for example, dyslexia, they may be ASC on the autism spectrum condition, dyspraxia, many other needs. And then I work with the teachers to see what we can put into place to help these students. So that will be things the teachers can do in class, but it might also mean me taking the students for small groups to teach them specific strategies so that they can go back and work in their class with their other students. The other part, the IATEFL Special Interest Group, IATEFL, the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, lots of initials here, have special interest groups. There's about 16. There's business, there's young learners, there's one for every aspect of English teaching. And I was particularly interested in the inclusive practice special interest group, which links to my work as a special education needs coordinator. And I was lucky enough, I've been on the team, I was on the committee for a few years, and I've just recently stepped down as coordinator and left my other committee members to carry on the work. So that's the IATEFL stuff.
Thank you. In your recent workshop and webinar, we had, that first we had a workshop, then we had a webinar. You focused on indirect learning strategies. Now, what inspired you to dig deeper into this topic?
Well, again, it all comes back to my students with specific needs. Teaching in group lessons, I really saw that it's not just a question of level of language, although they too often go together, but that some students just seem to get it. They know what to do. We're doing a listening, they know what to do. We're doing a reading, they know how to learn. And some students really don't. And also, part of my job in my last secondary school was helping students, sitting with them while they did private study. And I would see students who would just sit there looking at a piece of paper for an hour. And when I asked what they were doing, oh, I'm reading, I'm learning. And I'm like, that's not how you learn. And so I really wanted to find techniques to teach my students how to learn, which I think is what we all want, really. And I noticed that by teaching them how to learn, it then went on and improved their language lesson, of course, because they knew how to learn the stuff we were doing in class. So it came from students.
Do you think they're still relevant to today's classroom?
Yes, I do. I do, especially with adults, and even teens as well. I don't think we spend enough time teaching young people in school how to learn. And it, depending on where they come from, I see now when I work in primary that there's more time given to this. But I think the students I've worked with who are 15, etc., I don't think they had that when they were at primary school. And I don't think adults necessarily did too. And the thing with adults is many of us adults, we spend our lives doing things we know how to do. We like to stay in our comfort zone. And so we're not used to learning things. And we as teachers, we forget learning a language is hard. And we need to help our students know how to learn so that they can progress in English.
Thank you. Can you share a certain situation or a case when one of your strategies really helped a student with learning? Do you have
Oh,
certain
hundreds.
story or
yeah, hundreds. But one of the main things I do, I try and do in the beginning of all my lessons is in the school I was in, students had regular vocabulary tests. And it was when I started researching all this learning strategies and things like that. So it was actually during the school year. Now I do it at the beginning of the year, but during the school year, I sat down my class and I said, we're going to learn how to learn vocab. And we tried all these different ways out, etc. And obviously in my class, I had some really good students. I had some who were trying hard, and I had a couple, and one boy in particular I'm thinking of, who had just completely given up. He was a nice enough kid. We got on okay, but English was not for him. And I got them all to try these different methods, to try using cards, to try and draw pictures, to try and do this. And in the weeks that followed, his grades just shot up. And I used this action research as part of my master's thesis. And so I interviewed the students who were involved, who were willing, of course. And I interviewed him and I asked him what had changed or whether he thought these methods were effective. And he said that I had taught him that he could learn. And also not just in English, because then I found out from my colleagues that his marks had improved in other areas. And he had just not realized that you can learn how to learn things. And so he never knew how to revise for tests. He didn't understand what he was learning. And so all these methods to break things down, to be able to explain it simply, to look at your work and write questions, all this stuff that I was doing with him, he went on and used it in all his other classes. And he is really the one, or at least one of the first that I think of when I think of how it's changed my students. But indirect strategies have also helped those that lack self-confidence, that lack self-esteem, and that don't think they're going to be good enough. And I think that another thing that I think is really important in the classroom is to make space for mistakes. And that's probably one of the most important things that I would want to bring to a classroom is, in this room, we make mistakes. Because if you don't make them in your English classroom, where are you going to make them? You're not going to wait till you have a job interview to make your mistakes. Make them now, make lots of brilliant mistakes. And that's something I really try and bring to class.
Well, that leads us to another question. How can we just create a classroom atmosphere where students, instead of getting demotivated by making mistakes, into accepting them as something new or an opportunity, something
yeah. So I talk about this, and we do this a lot in class, and I remind my students at the beginning, the first few lessons when we have our speech about this is what we're going to be doing. I try and compare learning English in class to other learning experiences. They don't remember learning to walk as a baby, but how did you learn to walk? Did you just stand up and start walking, maybe running, hopping, skipping? Or did you fall over all the time? So this could mean that I might show them a video of a baby trying to walk, sitting down, falling, etc. And I explain that's how you learn to walk. You don't just get up and do it. So learning to speak English is going to be the same. We have a lot of posters around our rooms. There's lots of motivational sort of mottos. I like FAIL, which is FAIL, which stands for first attempt in learning. So we see those around the classroom. Also, I model it because I make mistakes all the time. And when I make a mistake on the board, or maybe on a worksheet, or we are doing some CLIL on science and I don't know something, I'm quite open about that. And I love it. And I tell my students whenever they do a presentation or something, a good day is a day I've learned something new. And so I think by modeling that we're not perfect, it does help them as well. And then, of course, it's the atmosphere in class. So when we're doing oral work and we're working on fluency, I don't correct everything my students say. I would never interrupt them to correct them. If we are doing more precise grammar work and we're working on the preterite and they say, I goed, I might use this as a moment and say, stop, have a think, but then I get them to correct it. And that's brilliant because you didn't know that, you've corrected it, so you have learned it. And that's why we're here today. And if you get everything correct all the time, you're not learning. And I keep reminding them that we need to learn, to evolve, to move forward. And even if they know all this, there's going to be moments in their life that they're going to, I hope, learn new things. And so that's what I'm giving them now, the skills to learn, to go off and do anything in the future. It can be computer coding, it can be running, swimming, whatever, but giving them the skills now so they can go off and learn anything else.
Thank you. That will help me when I'm studying German.
There you go.
I need that. I need that. Yeah. There's just a follow-up question. You mentioned before in our previous question, you talked a lot about tests, like they have a lot of tests, and I read for a fellow teacher who's also a colleague. He said that there is some kind of difference between education, for example, in England and the education in Germany. In Germany, there are a lot of tests,
Yeah.
and tests all the time. Now, I'm not going to dive into comparison between the two educational systems, but I would like to ask for your personal opinion and experience. And with adults, specifically with adults, do you think that the tests really show the real level of the person or the real knowledge of the person, or it's just somehow, I'm not going to say useless, but not as, informative as they're supposed to be? Especially that, that when as adults, that's why I asked you about adults. As adults, we have, unlike teenagers and young people, so we have a lot of things to worry about. We have our jobs, we have our family lives, etc. And sometimes we may not be in the mood for certain tests. We may have been doing great during the course, but the day of the test,
Completely.
something might go wrong. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, completely. Tests evaluate how you can produce certain knowledge on a specific day in a specific place, and are not at all related to how you might be able to use the preterite when talking with a group of people in a bar. And listening to what they're saying as well is obviously nothing like just writing the words on a piece of paper. Also, in our every, I mean, for me, basically, education systems are probably 100 years out of date, and our evaluations in those education systems are probably another 100 years. We expect kids to sit there with a piece of paper and write a perfect letter. If as an adult you need to write a letter to somebody in English, you're probably going to use Google Translate, you're going to check it, you're going to look online and get some examples, you're going to ask your peers to help you, maybe send it to your English aunt to get her to correct it. That's how we work now. So I feel we'd be better off teaching our students how to use AI and ChatGPT correctly and not believe everything it says. Teach them critical thinking, teach them how to find information and how to use it, rather than, nobody needs to learn the dates of whatever war anymore, do they? But so that's why I think teaching learning skills is more important than just teaching lists.
And since you mentioned it, I always ask this question. I always ask my guests this question. Do you think this ChatGPT, do you think it really helps us or it turns us into lazy teachers?
It's a tool. And like any tool, we could have said the same about photocopies in the past. Photocopying textbooks, does that make us lazy teachers, or should we be writing our own material all the time? It's a tool, and it depends on how you use it and how you can adapt it to what you want to do and how you want to teach. If it gives teachers extra time so that they have more time to individualize work for students within their classroom, for example, then it's brilliant.
Okay. Now, the last question before we dive into some personal questions. Okay, it's like a surprise. But this one is the last question about profession. So you emphasize teaching students how to learn, which is a theory that I seem to believe in, because I always tell my students that my job is not to teach you or to give you information, but to teach you how to get the information yourselves. How do you think we can balance this with the need to cover the book or the material, especially when the student has or is preparing for a certain test? Again, about tests.
Yeah. I think, first of all, by teaching them learning strategies, you save so much time in the long run. And there's no point teaching the present perfect continuous if they don't know how to learn it. So I really feel it's a balance. But also, many of the activities we do when teaching learning strategies, we're obviously using English. So if you're going to talk, for example, you're going to talk about challenges you had in the past, which is a way of motivating students and making them realize that although English is a challenge, they've done difficult things in the past, so they'll be able to do it now. So can everybody in the class tell me 3 difficult things they have already achieved? We're practicing the present perfect. And if you see that your students are really not getting the present perfect, then you can pick it up and say, look, I have run, I have written, I have done. What's the auxiliary? How would we form it? How would we do? So you can move on your language lesson from that. And again, you don't have to tell your students, today we are doing indirect learning strategies for motivation. You can say, today we're looking at the present perfect, if you prefer.
Thank you. Now, for our next stage, some questions by some people who attended the workshop, and some of them attended the webinar. And we're going to start with the first question from Justina. So I'm just going to read her question.
Yeah.
A question from one of those who attended the last webinar. Justina, how do you approach teaching grammar, especially tenses, reviews, but also issues like negations, word order, gerund versus infinitive, etc.?
So normally we pick out the grammar points from class, maybe from a reading or a listening we're doing, or as I mentioned before, we may be talking about something different, and I've noticed my students have not got this particular thing. So let's take the example of the present perfect. If I notice that they're not using it, then I'll introduce it and explain it. And one of the ways I've found very useful for my students is we do two things for most of the things we do in class. I have two whiteboards as well, which helps. So on one of them, we have a mind map. Some of my students find that very useful. So we will create a mind map, or I'll ask my students to do it. And on the other one, and especially for grammar, we enjoy doing this, is we will have a flow chart. So it will start with the question, are you talking about a recent event? Yes or no? Yes, no. And we add, is it dated? Yes, past tense. No, present perfect. Is it, which subject are we using? And then we will have I have, he has, etc. Is it an affirmative or negative? So we have a framework because most tenses you're sort of asking the same questions, and they will complete their flow chart, which will, and I see it during these tests or these Murphy exercises where you have put the past simple or the present perfect. I often see them writing on their tests, because they're allowed to write on the side. They might write their little flow chart just to help them. And that's a real step-by-step way of looking at grammar, because I think many students think that because we can't translate word for word, it's just sort of guess as you go along. It's what you feel. It's not. There are steps. If the phrase is about the present, we're going to say this. If it is about the past, we're going to use these. And by asking those questions in the same order, that helps the students place it. It's organized in their minds, and then they can reproduce it, and it's hopefully organized on their sheets. That's what we do with grammar.
Thank you. One more question from Betsy. I would like some advice on how to teach the word quiet. I'm referring mainly to adult German speakers.
Okay. So I'm not a German speaker, so I'm not aware if there's any specific difficulty. My students have two difficulties. Firstly is quite and quiet, especially for my students with dyslexia. So we would definitely look at that, how the E at the end of the word makes your I say the sound of the letter, like it, it. And we might compare it to, I don't know, Bic, bike, or Mac, make, how the E at the end is going to affect the pronunciation. So we'd look at pronunciation. And then I would probably teach it using other words, other variable adverbs. So extremely, very, quite. Just those three, so they could compare it. Is it extremely cold? Is it very cold? Is it quite cold today? And then use various examples.
Thank you. And last question from me. I can see behind you, you can learn something new every day if you listen. Now, based on that, do you think that married men are best learners?
I think all of us, not just married men. I'm not sure married men listen. They maybe nod. They're good at nodding, but I think it's true for all of us adults. I have a similar post that says mistakes are proof you're learning, but that's in my classroom, in fact. But I think as an adult, I want to be a lifelong learner, and I think listening is definitely the first step in that. It's easy to sort of bulldoze through life.
Yeah, tell me about that. Okay, so now we have reached the last stage of our podcast, which is some questions about your personal life, not private, just personal. So, Swiss lakes are cold in winter, right?
Yeah.
But still, some people swim
Yes.
during Christmas time. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you are one of them.
I'm as soon as we finish this podcast, I have my bag ready and I'll be going down to the lake with my friends. It's
Why?
it's not
Yeah.
it's not so much swimming. We spend 4 or 5 minutes in the lake, not much longer.
I mean, what brought this idea to you? Why? Just ask
It's
why.
it, it's been a bit of a craze in England and other countries as well, actually. My friends started doing it the year before I did. And I get like probably you and everyone else, I was like, you're mad, you're mad, you're mad. But obviously I tried it because try everything. And it's amazing. You feel so alive. First of all, I'm so lucky because I'm in the nature, I can see the mountains, etc. It's still a bit cloudy today, but normally it's a beautiful sunny day. So we can see the nature. You're only really cold. So we could compare it to learning. It's hard to start. It's a bit frightening to go in, but it's only actually cold for the first 5 or 6 breaths. Once you've breathed out and let go, and again, like with lots of things in life, if you're panic and stressed, then it's even worse. But if you can let go, then after a minute, you don't feel cold anymore. You feel numb, it stings a bit, etc. And that's when you have to be careful. You have to get out before you get too cold. And then you have to wrap up really warm afterwards and drink hot tea.
How long have you been doing it?
Probably 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years. And again, like with many things in life, the secret also is to sort of keep going. So we all swim in the lake in the summer when it's nice and hot. And then to keep going in September, October, November. Don't just stop and then go on the 1st of January. That's hard.
Well, I do have some kind of somehow similar experience in my hometown in Syria. We have tradition beginning of January. It's Jesus baptism. So people would
Yeah.
go somewhere, well, at night, uh, where when everyone is sleeping actually, and then they spill cold water on themselves 3 times. That symbolizes Jesus baptism in River of Jordan.
Wow.
Then yeah, in the New Testament. Yeah, we have like small Christian community. Yeah,
Mm.
and I'm familiar to that, but honestly, I've never tried cold water in January. And
Try everything once.
yeah, my hometown would reach the temperature in my hometown because it's located on a mountain, so it would go -10, -15 in winter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would thank you. It's
Try
not
it.
my
The secret is to have clothes that are easy to get on afterwards and wrap up very warm afterwards and stay warm afterwards. Because your body temperature keeps going down even after half an hour. So you have to keep your coat and hat on for a long time. Try
And
it.
are you able to maintain a balance between swimming and running a marathon and your job and personal life?
Well, luckily, I'm not running a marathon every week or every year. So when I am training for a marathon, it does take up more time. I'm running less at the moment, and going cold water swimming is perfect after sport. There's nothing better for your muscles. So yeah, but I think it's the same for all teachers. It's really teaching is a job. It's really easy to fall into too far. We've never finished planning. We can always find something new and exciting in a project, and we need to set barriers and we need to protect our personal lives and our home lives, because it takes a lot teaching, and so I think it's important to look after yourself as well, if only just to give the best to your students, but also for yourself. Life's for living.
Thank you. Just one more question about your book. That's the book for, okay, I will cut that just to take the blur.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So just one more question about your book. That's your book.
Yeah.
Yeah, for people who are interested in buying it, where can they find it?
It's available in most places. It's available on the famous book website, but it's also available from Delta, DELTA.com, which is the publishers that have edited and published it for me.
I will leave a direct link in the video description for people
Brilliant.
who are interested in buying it. So
Thank
the
you.
last question is your piece of advice for young teachers or who are making their first steps.
Enjoy it. Try new things. Don't get stuck into the teaching the same lesson for 20 years. Have fun. Have fun with your students and try new things. You're so lucky you've joined the best job in the world.
Okay, Rachel, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Ellie.
And for our podcast viewers and listeners, as we said before, this podcast is going to be available in two versions, the podcast, the audio version, and the audio version on Melta YouTube channel. And I'm going, for those who are interested in Rachel's book, I'm going to leave the direct link in the video description for those who are interested in buying it. Is it available as a PDF, as an electronic version, or only printed version?
So there's a printed version, but Delta have an accompanying website. So all the worksheets you can download as PDFs, which is brilliant.
Okay, perfect. So again, I'll leave the description and I'll leave the link in the video description. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us and see you later in another podcast.
Thank you, Ellie. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.